Hey guys, it's Will from the Game Lounge here. Today we're looking at the Sega Dreamcast. Without question, this system represents one of the most innovative periods in gaming. Sega had a habit of pioneering creativity just before it was ready to hit the mainstream. So we're going to take a look at the top 8 Dreamcast games that were quite simply way ahead of their time. What games on the Dreamcast do you think were well ahead of their time? Let me know in the comments and let's get started. So, Sonic Adventure on the surface may not seem to be a game that's ahead of its time. Yes, it had beautiful visuals and a fantastic sense of speed. Remember, this was 1998 when this game first released. But the game's controls have hardly aged well, and at the time the Nintendo 64 was very well known for its lineup of stellar platforming games. However, the Dreamcast's best-selling game did have some very progressive elements. For example, game's very clever use of the Dreamcast's VMU. Now, while primitive by today's standards, the game gave you the ability to go online and download special event packs, which would focus on bringing gamers back to the game again and again. There were events, for example, for the Dreamcast's European launch. There was a Christmas event where they put a Christmas tree in Station Square, and even a Y2K event. Now, don't get me wrong, these were pretty basic due to memory constraints back then, but the idea of event-based gaming still exists today with double XP and skins to represent various events, and it's still a staple of gaming now. Add to that the fact that you had the idea to integrate with the Chow Garden, allowing you to take virtual pets on the go and integrate them in the game, and there was some extremely progressive thinking with this game. The best part of a decade before Nintendo went big with their Nintendo Wii console, selling over 100 million consoles, it was actually the Dreamcast that came along with the first really mainstream motion control games. And I'm cheating a bit here because this is not just a single game, but Samba de Amigo's Maracas were quite possibly the best example of the crazy levels of creativity going on at Sega. Effectively, 2 players would stand and shake their maracas long before Just Dance came along and dominated the world. Not only that though, Sega also released the fantastic fishing controller, effectively a wand-based controller that would allow you to simulate fishing. However, this went one step further, being compatible with Soul Calibur's swords and even Virtua Tennis, a primitive version of Wii Sports. At number 6 is Choo Choo Rocket, and again a game that on the surface doesn't look particularly revolutionary, but in particular we're talking about the European version here because Sega Europe decided to give this game away for free. Yes, in effect one of the early examples of free-to-play gaming, the idea being that people would sign up for the SegaNet service and could take this game online. I did that. It was a huge amount of fun, so mission accomplished for me. Sadly, this didn't have the massive SegaNet Dream Arena sign-up that people expected. But Choo Choo Rocket conceptually represents Sega Europe trying to look at the idea of giving something away in return for what would have been a recurring SegaNet revenue. Pretty innovative if you ask me. At number 5, we have Soul Calibur. Now, Sega was already known for having a large presence in the arcade, and a large percentage of their games were arcade conversions, something they were at times criticized for. The Dreamcast, on the other hand, had a very similar architecture to the Naomi platform. This meant that they could easily bring games to the console and would often add many features. However, Soul Calibur for me was the game that almost signified the end of arcade gaming. Namco was able to not only bring the game, but bring the game looking significantly better than its PlayStation-based arcade board counterpart. Not only that, they added an incredible story mode and mission battle mode, which just gave the game so much more depth, when you compare the visuals, there was just no contest. And for me, this was something that showed that arcades could not supply what they used to. Originally, an arcade cabinet would cost $40,000 and would really be a vision into the future. Soul Calibur flipped that whole thing on its head and was the start of consumers having more power at home than the arcades. Quake 3 received an excellent port to the Sega Dreamcast, a port which allowed you to go online, but not only that, it was a port that offered cross-platform play. Now this is something that wouldn't become mainstream really for another 15 years, but back in 2000, players could jump in on their Dreamcast and easily jump into rooms with PC players alike. In fact, I remember being at university and one of my friends on their PC assuming that they would jump into a Dreamcast room to watch everybody struggle with the controller like I am here, only to find that the Dreamcast mouse and keyboard accessory was a great game changer. Prior to Quake 3, the idea of consoles mixing with the PC master race was almost unheard of, but the Dreamcast made this happen. In fact, there's still many unofficial servers running to this day which you can jump onto and play some classic Quake 3.
We all play games. Why don't we play together? Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
At number 3 is Phantasy Star Online. Now, whilst massive multiplayer online RPGs certainly weren't new, the idea of putting one on a console was absolutely unheard of. However, Phantasy Star Online managed to do that, and not only that, but with one of the nicest online communities I have ever known. Okay, you could actually only take a party of 4 into the main Ruggle world. However, back in the hub, there could be up to thousands of players walking around, talking, sharing items, meeting and greeting, etc. Phantasy Star Online actually had something that you wouldn't see until you saw Diablo's Torment levels much later, and that was you're not expected to be able to really get through any levels certainly on the harder difficulties with a fresh character. You have to build up, take out what you can in various areas, go back, bank your meseta, pick up your items, upgrade your mag, and then you can maybe go back again and try and get a little bit further. Almost a roguelike element to this game. Looting and leveling up was a staple here, and actually the game is still fun to jump back into now. I highly recommend, if you've never tried it, the GameCube version, which can play through local co-op with up to 4 players. It's an absolute blast. Or you can check out the PSO Blueburst PC version, which is still running to this day. The game was, to me, pioneering and set the standard for console RPGs going forward. Coming in at number 2, we have Jet Set Radio, and more specifically, its cel-shaded graphics. Now, Jet Set Radio wasn't technically the first to do this. There were PlayStation games like Parappa the Rapper, which had cel-shaded 2D images, and Fear Effect, which had rendered backgrounds but cel-shaded characters. However, Jet Set Radio was the first really to take the cel shading concept and do it properly, implementing it across the entire game. Whilst early games would basically try to use drawn textures rather than actual shading, it was Jet Set Radio that introduced cel shading in a proper manner, as a shader that actually generates the cel shading on the fly. The effect is almost timeless, with the game looking just as good today, and in fact many mainstream titles went on to copy the effect, most notably of course Zelda Wind Waker, which is another game whose visuals mean that it stood the test of time in a way so many games from that generation have not. So my number one pick here, and where do I even start with a game like Shenmue? Recreating Yokosuka, allowing players the freedom to really go where they want. A huge open world like we'd never really seen before. You could literally waste your time going to the arcades, buying toy capsules, or perusing the shops. Not to mention ideas that were borrowed again and again. The open world nature would become in itself a genre that we see now many games adopting. And its use of Yu Suzuki's coined QTEs, or QuickTime events, is something that you would see some of the biggest franchises in gaming start to borrow. From Resident Evil to Tomb Raider, they were all there. The game itself is still an absolute masterpiece, and despite some clunky controls, is still a game I can go back to and play again and again. If you missed Shenmue and just want to know what the fuss is about, of course, the HD versions are available on both Xbox and PlayStation. Highly recommend you give it a go again, because this game really, for its time, was pioneering. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like, comment and subscribe. I love hearing everybody's feedback, and I'll see you again soon with a new video.
No thanks. Excuse